I think you might have sort of alluded to this already, but one of the things I was curious about was I know there are some historical novelists who will do things like drop in a character in their story who actually historically wasn't born until 15 years after. That they'll play a little fast and loose with historical facts. How much do you stick to history, and how important do you think it is to stick very closely to historical facts?
I stick as close as I can because I think it's really, really important. I think the trick, and this is one of the tricks of being a historical novelist, is to keep the history straight without fudging it, if at all possible, but not, but also keep the story interesting. You're trying to keep both intertwined, so you shouldn't fudge the history. And if the story's sort of stalling, then part of the actual fun and challenge is finding a way around to make that story not stall while keeping the history true. I think that's part of the good historical novelist craft. So sometimes if I can't find out the name of a servant or something, I don't let that stall me forever. There's some things you can't find out, in which case you have to go with your best guess based on the research you've done.
Right.
But to try it true as you can and find a way around. That's the challenge. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. How can I make this still a good story without warping the history?
Right.
And usually, if you it's
and you
leave your subconscious to work on it.
Right. And that brings me to something else that I was actually thinking about as I was kind of preparing this interview. And it's this saying that truth is stranger than fiction. And as I've dug into Robert the Bruce, I've really felt like truth is more interesting than anything we can make up. For instance, which story am I thinking about Robert the Bruce? There's the one where he went into battle and he told I believe it was his bishop or priest, to bring this casket with the arm bone of a saint. I think it was Saint Philin. And the bishop was afraid of it being lost to the English, so he didn't do what he was told. And as Robert the Bruce was praying that night, so the story goes, there was this loud crack and flash, and he opened the casket, and there's the arm bone. And, I think it was Mark Twain who said the difference between truth and fiction is fiction has to make sense. And so if you make that up, a lot of readers are going to be like, yeah, that didn't happen. But when you read it historically, and as a novelist, you can say, I didn't make that up. According to historical records, it actually happened. I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you feel that we could make up something more interesting than the truth?
I don't know, really. I think that if something is a bit seems very strange, then you put it in your author's notes to show that show where you got it from. But I've never really thought about the other question, actually. I tend to stick with the truth as I go along, and don't think, I could make up something more fantastical here. I mean, that scene I've just read with the monkeys and everything, we know that Thomas Becket had to assemble his menagerie and ship it across the channel, and that we know there were 12 monkeys, one to ride each horse. So it's all invented about the conversation, but I was sort of imagining, what would happen with the monkeys. So that's all made up. Right. But the actual basis for it is true.
That's what I love about digging into histories. So, and then a number of your books involve King John, who was the villainous brother of King Richard the Lionheart in the Robin Hood stories. And, I have very strong opinions about how Robert the Bruce was portrayed in Braveheart, after having studied his life so much. How accurate do you think the portrayals of Prince John are in those Robin Hood legends?
Well, I'm not sure about the Robin Hood legends, but definitely I'm not. I think that John was something of a psychopath. I think that he was extremely intelligent, well educated. I think he had it in him to be a tyrant, which is what one of his the main historian on him, W.L. Warren, says. He had the abilities of a great king and the inclinations of a petty tyrant. And the great William Marshall also threatened King John's son, young Henry, after his father had died, had this child brought before him William Marshall was on his deathbed, and he said, "If ever you should turn out to be like a certain wicked ancestor, then I wish you a short life."
Mm-hmm.
Now, for William Marshall to say that, I mean, okay, it was put into his mouth by the words of his biographer, but that to me is a man speaking the truth, a man who stood by King John through thick and thin, but what he actually thought comes out on his deathbed. So no, I'm not in the cheer for John camp.
Well, and that brings up, the question of how much can we be completely objective, where, let's say, King Richard III, he has a very bad reputation in history, and yet there's this whole group of people who says he was completely misportrayed, he was lied about, what we're being told isn't necessarily the truth. It seems like there's not really a way to defend King John so easily.
I think you can look at not everybody, nobody is completely black or completely white.
Mm-hmm.
So it would take, you'd have to sort of be, I think, a dedicated historian to look more at his grey areas.
Mm-hmm.
There were probably areas where he was quite reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Others where not so much, where the abilities, not the abilities, become where he was more of a tyrant, come out. So it's what path you walk between them, I think.
Well, and as I was digging into some of the questions historically, one of the things that came across was that historians' views completely conflict about his second marriage. And so Nicholas Vincent says he was downright mean to Isabella, and William Chester Jordan, on the other hand, says they were a companionable couple who had a very successful marriage by the standards of the day. So how do you decide, as a novelist, as a researcher, which of views do you portray?
Well, Nicholas Vincent, I would look at the credentials of the particular person who was writing the book. Nicholas Vincent is one of the authorities who's worked in the area for all of his career, and is one of our most eminent professors. And I would go with Nicholas Vincent all the way along. I'd go with Nicholas Vincent, David Carpenter, Mark Morris. With those. Stephen Church is a little bit more, I haven't read the other one you mentioned, must admit. Stephen Church is a little bit more on the fence, but I would tend to read all the academic biographies and then make my own path through them, from my own research too, which is reading quite a lot of the primary sources that the academics have been looking at. And decide for myself. I think the more you read around a subject, the more you come to get the nuances. But definitely, I'd go with an assessment by Nicholas Vincent above any other biographer.
It's really interesting. One of the sources I used. Are you familiar with Nigel Tranter, the Scottish historical fiction writer?
Yes. Yes.
I love him, and I hope those aren't fighting words. But
I'm not kidding.
It was very interesting that as I dug into, just hundreds, if not thousands, of websites and books, as I learned more and more and more, I would read a novel by Nigel Tranter about the Bruce. I think it's called Steps to the Empty Throne, or Path to the Empty Throne is his trilogy. And there would be this little detail that would conflict with what a historian or a book had said. And the more I dug in and researched more and more and more, I would invariably find out that it was almost certainly Nigel Tranter, supposedly a fiction writer, who was correct. And I developed a lot of respect for him, and I would continue to pursue and see if I could find who's right, Nigel or this supposed historic book. But usually, if not always, it was Nigel Tranter who was right. So I was, and I'm curious, would you ever write books, say, presenting whichever character from a different view, if historians have two views? would you ever take the other view and say, what if he was like this?
I think it's I might do, but I would need strong evidence. I would like to say, with Tranter, what's his evidence? Where did he get his source from? Would be my first question.
Right.
And I'd look at what his sources were. But why I'm not keen on Nigel Tranter is I'm not particularly keen on his writing style. And I also started reading one and found numerous historical errors, but that was on David, who was the brother of Queen Matilda, Edith Matilda, and I thought, well, that's not true, and I know that's not true, and I know that's not true, and also the great long 100-word sentences, and I thought, no, so I didn't even finish it. I thought, no, not for me. My parents loved him. We lived in Scotland, and they read loads of Nigel Tranter, but he's not one of my go-tos. But yeah, I would look at. There's always different ideas to be garnered. I think you need to read extensively to decide why you are going to take the alternative view, and how much you can trust what you're reading.
Right.
I mean, Eleanor of Aquitaine is absolutely fascinating, because you read her modern biographies, and they tell you so much rubbish that. They might as well be fiction.
And that's sad, especially when you, as a novelist, are apparently doing way more research than they are. And, I've come to believe, especially after reading so many research books, I think that's often the case, that people who are writing historical fiction may actually know way more than some of the people writing the history books.
I think it does depend. For example, I know Nicholas Vincent knows way more than I do. But if you're reading a popular biography, when I was researching Eleanor of Aquitaine, I thought, well, I need to know, what did she look like? Are there any description? And there isn't a single description anywhere of her physically, eye, hair colour, any of that. And yet all her popular biographies were busy giving. One of them made her a black-haired, black-eyed beauty who didn't run fat in old age, didn't lose her figure. Another one said that she was a blue-eyed blonde, a saucy, hot-blooded damsel. Another said, said that she was red-haired and green-eyed.
And they never backed this up where they got it.
Well, no, there isn't a single piece of evidence to show any of that. There's not one.
Wow.
No, anywhere. And yet, this was Alison Weir, Marion Mead, Desmond Seward, can't remember the other ones, Douglas Boyd, even W.L. Warren. He's sort of an authority on Henry VII, said she was a black-eyed beauty. Nowhere, absolutely nowhere. Say any of this. It's all rubbish.
Really interesting to talk to them personally and say, where did you get this from? Especially with complete contrast. So storytelling is as old as the human race. Why do you think we have such a deep, profound need to write stories, to read stories, to tell stories to each other?
I think it's to understand ourselves and to understand the world we live in, and to garner nuggets of wisdom. It's also natural to entertain, to express emotion, to absorb emotion, to learn empathy. There's a whole wide range, that communication, bonding with other people, things to think about. Even it's all in there. It's primeval. It's in us. And I think all those things I've just mentioned are vitally important.
Right. Years ago when I talked to, actually, he was my boss where I taught music lessons. He's from Russia, and we were talking about Russian storytelling. And he was talking about how dark Russian fairy tales are, that, everything goes wrong, everybody ends up dead and, in bad places. And he was talking about how it's better to learn it from a story than being stupid yourself and ending up there. And I thought that was a great point.
It's very true. And it's also, I think, one of the reasons why people so love true crime and everything, because it's happening to somebody else, and you can or you can read all these murders in the safety of your own home. Same with horror. you can experience it all from your armchair, which is a lot better than, and also you can ask yourself, how would I deal with it? And so it's testing it out in safety. And I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah, I have 2 last questions for you. What are you working on now? What's next for you?
At the moment, I'm just editing and nearly finishing an untitled novel at the moment, which is about a princess of South Wales, Nesta Fairchrys, who was, after her father was killed, was taken as a concubine by Henry II, and then married, had several husbands, the first of whom is the main story in this, Gerald of Windsor, and they became the ancestors actually of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, among others. So it's from Nesta and Gerald's marriage that the Fitzgeralds descend. But it's a story of her life, and I sort of, probably with Henry I, he had something like 21 illegitimate children, and a lot of the time it seems to me that, oh, he got all these mistresses, and people often in the past have said, oh, he was such a good lover. No, he wasn't. He was just, these girls were fodder, and he got, why not? It was just because he could. Sort of thing. So I'm sort of exploring that a bit through Nesta, and Nesta as a survivor, and also having to deal with what was thrown at her, and also Gerald himself, and a marriage to a Norman, and how they got on.
When is that coming out?
Oh, it's not till next year. I've got to have it handed in by November 1st, and then I've got a couple of other projects that I'm reading up at the moment that I'm under wraps at the moment.
Okay, that's enticing. Throw out a mystery there, and people will want to learn more. What is your best advice to aspiring writers? You've written 28 novels in 30 years. That's a fantastic accomplishment. What is your best advice?
Oh gosh. Well, it's definitely enjoy what you do, and don't be afraid when you're writing at home. Then have fun. Don't. Rules are only guidelines. I sometimes see on forums, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do the other. But it's like Captain Barbossa in Pirates of the Caribbean. It's more like guidelines, really. So don't get hidebound into you've got to write all this in deep third tense. No, you don't. When you're at home, you can do what you want, and you just enjoy it, I think. So that's the main bit of actual creative advice.
I have a funny story to tell related to that. I've always told my kids, do what you love for a living, and that way you never work a day in your life. And, so I've been blessed that I have been able to make a living both teaching and playing music and writing novels. I mean, this is what I've wanted to do since I was 8, and I can do it. And so, but then this got tossed in my face because when they were little, they would leave light switches on all over the place, and I'd be on their back, you kids, turn off the lights. I work hard for the money to pay that electric bill. And they'd go, no, you don't. You do what you love. You've never worked a day in your life. I'm like, I don't care, turn off the lights anyway. Always got a kick out of them throwing that back in my face like that, though, and reminding me, you do what you love, you don't work. I can't argue with that.
It's like it's the Dire Straits song, isn't it? Money for nothing. That ain't working. That's the way you do it.
Right. So, what are the links, and where can people find you or find your books?
Sorry, I didn't quite that.
Where can people find you online?
Online. Oh, right. Well, my website is www.elizabethchadwick.com, and then I'm on you can find me on Facebook. I've not actually got the address to hand. I'm on Twitter at Chadwick Author. I've got a writer's page, an author's page on Facebook, as mentioned. And yes, the little A sign and Chadwick Author on Twitter.
Fantastic. And you can find me at lauravosica.com and booksandbrews.net. And Let me see. Usually I do an upcoming events. All I really have is Gabriel's Horn is accepting poetry submissions for our third annual poetry anthology of new poetry in traditional forms. And you can find that information on the gabrielshornpress.com/poetry-anthology page. And that link works now. It's been giving me trouble. So coming up next week, we actually have somebody who's sort of at the very opposite end of her writing career. She's just put out her first book as of, I believe it was June 20th, maybe. And her name is Nancy Laird Young, and I know her from the Books by Brett. So she grew up in the military like I did. And her book is Tea with Dad, Finding Myself in My Father's Life. And it talks about her life with her 90-year-old career military father. So she is just starting her publishing life and her author life. So thank you very much for being here, Elizabeth.
Thank you.